Good morrow, one and all. I'm Mr. King, and today I'll be analysing the poem Envy by Mary Lamb. This will be a really short video because this is a really short poem with a very simple message, and truth be told, I think the hardest part of this poem is working out what to say about it. So shall we dive straight into it? So here we go, Envy. This rose tree is not made to bear the violet blue, nor lily fair, nor the sweet mignonette. And if this tree were discontent, or wished to change its natural bent, it all in vain would fret. And should it fret, you would suppose it ne'er had seen its own red rose, nor after gentle shower had ever smelled its rose's scent, or it could ne'er be discontent with its own pretty flower. Like such a blind and senseless tree as I've imagined this to be, all envious persons are. With care and culture all may find some pretty flower in their own mind, some talent that is rare. Right, what's going on here? Very simply, Mary Lamb is saying, don't envy. That really is it. Don't envy. It's a very simple poem. So by envy, we mean desiring something that other people have, or wanting to be like someone else. Don't be that person. Don't be envious. Don't be jealous. Just don't. And there's a little bit of tricky language, but what I think we'll do, we'll quickly whiz through it, check we understand it, and we'll dive straight into our analysis. So Mary Lamb begins with a rose tree. Hello, there's a rose tree. And she asks readers to imagine that a rose tree didn't want to have roses growing on it anymore. Instead, this rose tree might want to have violets growing on it, or lilies growing on it, or even mignonette, which is apparently a sweet-smelling grass. Imagine a rose tree that didn't want to grow roses, it wanted to grow these other flowers. Well, Mary Lamb says in the first stanza that rose tree can want other flowers all it likes, but it's going to be wanting it for no reason. A rose tree cannot grow violets on it, it cannot have lilies growing on it. It all in vain would fret, she says, which means it would want this thing for no reason. It'd be hopeless. You'd be getting worried for no reason. And then in the second stanza, Lamb says, and if this rose tree was fretting, was worrying, was wanting to be something else, it's almost like the rose tree isn't aware how beautiful it is. I mean, look at the rose tree. Beautiful. You would suppose it never had seen its own red rose. Or the rose tree might never have smelled how beautiful the roses smell after a rain shower. Or it could never be discontent, it could never be unhappy with its own pretty flower. So we've got Mary Lamb says, a rose tree wanting to grow other flowers, it's worrying for no reason, and it's also missing the fact that it's already got loads of brilliant things going on in its own life. And then Mary Lamb ends the poem by saying, if you are envious, you are like this rose tree wanting other flowers to grow on you. You are worrying for no reason, it all in vain would fret, and you're missing out on the gifts and talents you already have. Like the rose tree missed out on the fact that the roses it already produced were beautiful and smelt beautiful. And she says, like such a blind and senseless tree, as I've imagined this to be, all envious persons are. With care and culture all may find some pretty flower in their own mind, some talent that is rare. So very simply, if you are an envious person, you're like a rose tree wanting to grow violets on it. You are being a bit foolish, it makes no sense, you can envy after the violets all you want, but it's never going to happen, and you're probably missing out on your own gifts and talents in the process. So the conflict in this poem is the internal conflict caused by envy, and Mary Lamb points out to us how foolish envy is. So, what do you write about if this comes up in the exam? Well, the first thing that you might want to talk about is Lamb's use of personification. Here in the first stanza, Lamb talks about the rose tree feeling discontent, like a person might feel discontent or unhappy. So we've got the personification of the rose tree. Why does Lamb use personification? Well, I would suggest that Lamb uses personification to show how ridiculous it is to be envious. The rose tree, which wants to have lilies growing on it, is being ridiculous. And in the same way, if you are envious for something that you cannot have, you are being just as ridiculous. So Lamb uses personification to show how ridiculous it is to be envious. And Lamb reinforces this message by showing that being envious can also make you really uncomfortable. And she does this by using two techniques. She uses a semantic field of uncomfortable words, and she uses end stopping. At the end of lines 4, 5 and 6 we have the words discontent, bent and fret. They all have something in common, and that is an uncomfortable feeling. Discontent is a feeling of not being happy with yourself. Being bent out of shape is also an uncomfortable feeling, and fretting means to worry. So we've got a group of words with this theme of being uncomfortable in common, and this shows that being envious can make you really uncomfortable. It shows that being envious is really unpleasant. And Lamb reinforces this idea and draws our attention to this idea by the use of end stopping. End stopping is when we have punctuation at the end of lines as opposed to in the middle of lines. And this punctuation forces us to pause and think about the words that came just before it. So here, the comma after the word discontent makes us pause on the word discontent. The same thing with the word bent. The comma forces us to pause on the word bent, or the end stopping forces us to pause on the word bent, and same with the word fret. So Lamb uses end stopping to force us as readers to pause on these words which highlight just how uncomfortable being envious is. She continues to show how unpleasant being envious is by the use of repetition. We've got repetition of the verb fret, as in fretting, worrying. And this repetition shows how unpleasant the internal conflict of being envious is. Now at this point, I'm beginning to feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. And that is in part because this is a very simple poem with really one very simple message, and really all you can do when you write about this poem is talk about the different ways that she's essentially saying the same thing. So apologies if it sounds like I'm repeating myself. I kind of am, but I'm trying to show you different ways that you can analyse Lamb's message that being envious is fundamentally unpleasant and ridiculous. One thing you could talk about, which is slightly more sophisticated, is the contrast between stanza 1 and stanza 2. In stanza 1, Lamb shows us how unpleasant it is to be envious, and in stanza 2, Lamb shows us that if you're envious, you miss your own gifts and talents, and you could be really content if you focused on those things. So going back to the rose tree extended metaphor we've got here, the rose tree, which is being ridiculous and want to have lilies growing on it, is missing the fact it's already got its own beautiful red flowers on it. It's missing the fact that it's got these beautiful flowers which smell amazing after a gentle shower. In the same way, if you are being envious, you are missing the gifts and talents that you already have. And the contrast between how uncomfortable envy is in stanza 1 and the missed opportunities in stanza 2 reinforces the message, envy is unpleasant. More repetition is used, repetition of the words discontent, again just to highlight that negative feeling, you will be discontent if you envy. And then we come to the simile that everyone is going to write about if this poem comes up in your exam. Lamb ends by saying, if you are an envious person, you are like such a blind and senseless tree. If you are envious, you are like this rose tree. I've said that so many times, I'm not going to dwell on that anymore. But what I will say is we've got more end stopping to really reinforce her moral message. Her tone becomes almost like a teacher, I suppose, teaching a lesson to a very small child. You know, like such a blind and senseless tree, as I've imagined this to be, all envious persons are. And then there's end stopping. There's that punctuation which forces us to pause. In this case, it's the use of a colon. All envious persons are. It's a very assertive tone. It's a very moralistic tone. And the same thing at the end. If you are envious, you're missing some talent that is rare within yourself. You've got to look in yourself and recognise your own gifts and talents in the same way that the rose tree would benefit from doing that. So I hope you found that useful. There's a few ideas you could think about, which I hope might help you if you had to write about this in this exam. That just leaves me to say one final thing about this poem. If this poem comes up in the A question, the comparison question, obviously you have to write about it. Quick reminder, the A question is the one where you'll be given a poem that you've studied in your anthology and an unseen poem, and you have to compare them. So if envy comes up in the A question, you have to write about it. And I hope this video will have equipped you with some ideas that you could use to write about. For the B question, however, you'll be given a question and you have to use one of the poems from your anthology to answer that question. Now, for any question that the examiners give you, there will usually be a few different poems which are appropriate to use. My advice to you is don't use envy for the B question unless you are really, really stuck. As you've discovered in this video, there's really not very much to say about it, which means that everyone who writes about envy will be saying the same things, and that's going to make it harder for you to write something which is going to stand out. It's going to make it harder for you to make a really compelling argument which is unique or a bit different from what everyone else is saying. If it comes up in the A question, then the fact that you'll be comparing it to another poem will give you opportunities to show off your analytical skills. But for the B question, it's just going to be harder to get those top marks. Not impossible, but harder. So my advice is don't write about envy unless you are really, really stuck for the B question. I hope you found it useful. This has been my analysis of the poem Envy by Mary Lamb. If you'd like more videos like this, then please hit those like and subscribe buttons. I'll be making more in the near future. I've got other videos about the OCR Poetry Anthology. I'll put some links up on the description below and hopefully on this screen now. I've also got some other videos about top 5 lists related to literature, so please do check those out. And as ever, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I hope you found this useful, and until next time, cheerio.